All right. Well, good morning, everyone. And here we are in part 3 of the Great Salt Pond Stroll. And as I will be for this whole series, always going to start with the same title slide, but with a different date. Just to remind you where we are, on the left is the Great Salt Pond or the New Harbor chart. And on the right is a very bad internet photo of what the Great Salt Pond looks like when it's full of boats. Which is not quite this full today, but there are quite a few boats out there. Hasn't been this full in a number of years, but it's dramatic nonetheless. But we'll go into today's area. So today we're going to be doing the area which are called the inner ponds or Trims and Harbor Pond. And it's this area right here. Square linear footage, if you were to go along the whole edge, you would find that it is actually quite a big area. And what is let's see if I have the right one. Yeah, here's an up close of the area that we're going to be talking about, the inner harbors. But there's a few things. This is my old favorite stonewall map of the section. And there's a lot of things to notice in this old map. One is the things that are different, but also how similar they are to today. So last week we came down and went around the end of Indian Head Neck and this spit. And I talked about the old road that came across from west side. The boat launching ramp is right here into what is now a channel, but in the 1890s was not yet a channel. It was a road that went across up to Indian Head Neck, and it was Indian Head Neck Road. So we've come along this part, and we're going to be going into Trims and Harbor Ponds. Now, I've learned a lot from doing this. I've always been a little confused about, I grew up, my grandparents have a house over here on Trims Pond, so I always thought of this part as Trims Pond, and I didn't know what the rest of this was. And some people call it Trims Pond or Harbor or the Hog Pen. So now I can tell from this old map that the whole two lobes of this, so the east part of Trims Pond and the west part of Trims Pond, is all Trims Pond. And I'll show this a little bit later, but the Hog Pen is just an area in Trims Pond. And then you could go around to this lobe and this is the Beach Avenue, where the bridge is right here. And then it flows under the bridge into the back part, which is Harbor Pond. And these are quite, it's really quite a big area. And there are many places where, as it shows here, it does still today, fresh water is flowing into Trims and Harbor Ponds. Back here by behind Red Gate Farm, there's a pond and swamp that flows into it, fresh water. Over here behind the power company underneath Beach Avenue is a culvert that flows fresh water into Trims. Over here, you don't see it so much, but there's a culvert that comes from Milltail Swamp under Ocean Avenue and then into the back of Harbor Pond and then flows out. And up here in Trims Pond, there's a big, just below the Sullivan House, a little swamp and really a sweet little open freshwater pond that flows underneath the road that goes to the Sullivan House that flows in. So there's a lot of infiltration of fresh water into all of these water bodies. Let's see, one thing that's we'll be talking a little bit about Fort Island, and this is just to show that in the late 1800s, it really was an island. Now, what's called the New Road or the Ocean Avenue was built up to come down by the police station and crosses over the bridge for, I call it Trims Pond Bridge, onto Fort Island, and it's on either side. And then you can keep going down to Painstock. So that doesn't yet show on this old map. You will see right here where it says a Hygeia. That's the original Hygeia house, not what we know of now as the Hygeia, which was originally the annex. This is about where Negus Park and the police station is right now. So that's just a little, we're going to be talking about all these areas. I have walked along the perimeter of all of these water bodies, except for right back here in this western part of Trum's Pond. But for the purposes of this, I walked some of it, but some of it I went by land, and I just more or less to make the point of how accessible all of these ponds are. Although we don't think of them as being part of the Great Salt Pond, they totally are. They're tidal, and they're, for the most part, salt water, except for where the fresh water is coming in. And so just to bring us up to date, here's a Google Earth map of the area that was, I think this was 2006. I tend to pick these dated ones, not because of the date, but because of the contrast they can provide. But just to review a couple of things on this, the area right here, which you may know as the Hog Pen because of a little marina right here called the Hog Pen. This area has been called the Hog Pen for over 100 years. And why it's called that is a question. I've asked many people over my life and only gotten one answer. And that was from Rob Lewis, who told me that it was because I believe it was World War I, when some of the early submarines were in the area. They would come in here and they looked like hogs or pigs in the water. They were, mostly submerged, but not completely. Whether or not that's apocryphal, I do not know, but that is the only answer I've ever gotten to the question, why is it called the Hog Pen? But I can definitively say it's not because there's a marina there called the Hog Pen, because the marina wasn't there when it was known as that. And then there's this little island, Rat Island, which we'll be seeing as we go along. I've marked where fresh water comes in with these yellow stars, but more importantly, where the green stars are areas of public open space, and you can go to these places, and they are the Solviken, which goes right up to this part of Harbor Pond. The Beach Avenue Trail is quite a large landmass that goes right up to this part of Harbor Pond. And then over here, Negus Park, which this is Ocean Avenue, Negus Park. And because I should have showed it, but on the earlier map, you'll see that the road didn't continue this way, but it did go this way behind the Hygeia at the time. And that road is vestigial, and it's still there. There's a town right away. It goes along the edge of Negus Park, and then you can take it out to about here and then come up to Beach Avenue, and you have a right. It's maintained, it's mowed. You have a right to walk there, public right to walk there. So I often like to point out where you can go in the public, and there's a lot more access to these back ponds than you might have thought. With that, we'll move on to where we left off last time. We were at this rocky spit at very low tide, looking across at the Hog Pen, and we make the corner, and then we're starting to go east back into the inner harbor. And again, this spit shows at low tide quite well. One of the things we're gonna not focus on, but becomes apparent in this particular walk is that the Great Salt Pond is not just a beautiful ecosystem and natural history specimens to be found. It's also sort of rich with recreation activities going on, as well as commercial. It's very much a working waterfront in many ways. And you might not always think of that, but we'll see quite a number of ways that is represented. First of all, when you look across, before I go there, we've gone out to that secondary spit, and I did one of those funny panoramas where you can be looking this way back at the channel and Deadeye Dick's new building and the Black Island Maritime Institute, the channel. And then this way we're going east into the mud around Indian Head Neck. And so that's what that looks like. But if you turn around and look at the other direction, you'll see this wonderful, beautiful old historic building. This is the Weather Bureau. and it sits up there. It was built in 1903. So again, around the Great Salt Pond, especially on the eastern and southern edges, there are many beautiful historic buildings from around the turn of the century, late 1800s and early 1900s. So the Weather Bureau is quite a beautiful building, and it truly was a weather bureau. It used to be that you would report weather, and especially sea and wind conditions, from one weather station to the next. And that's where the weather would be reported from Eastport to Block Island. And when it was getting weather information, it would be from this weather bureau. And they had a lot of their instruments up on the flat roof, which was one of the reasons the roof was flat, so that you could have your odometer, not your odometer, your anemometer, a word I could never say, your wind speed indicator, and your thermometers and your rain gauges and everything else. So beautiful building. It has had some renovations, but the overall impression of the building is intact, and it's well kept up. So lots of people, including me, love this building. And as I mentioned, lots of evidence of work boats in the Hog Pen. The Laura is a lobster boat, and then this other is I believe this boat is owned by Chris Reeves. He does a lot of the mooring work on Block Island. So that little contraption in the back is a derrick of sorts, so you can lift and lower heavy things like mooring balls and things like that. So that's a working boat right there, moored out in the Hog Pen area. But evidence of old working waterfront is this hunk of metal right in the middle here. It's a little bit east of Rhode Island. Everybody who navigates in there, whether it's in a boat or a kayak or a paddleboard, knows to look out for this, because you can see it fine at low tide, but at high tide, it's pretty much just under the surface. This is part of what was called the old clam dredge. And it was a dredge they used to dredge out, again, in the 1800s. They had a steam dredge, and it wasn't, when I first heard that it was a clam dredge, I, for many years, lived under the impression that it was a dredge for getting clams. But no, a clam dredge is like a shovel, a two-parted shovel, like a clam, hinged, so you could go down into the sand and use that clam-like apparatus to scoop up with two hands, scoop up the material and dredge it out. So, but that big hunk of the old clam dredge has been there as long as I can remember. So if you're navigating out there, be careful. Now, as we start to move a little bit further east, going back into the eastern part of Trim's Pond, you'll see here's the beach house on the far edge. It's very low in this area, so it's hard to get elevation and landmarks that way, but you'll start to see a lot of buoys back here. And this is an area where there's quite a bit of aquaculture. And the green buoys here and these buoys here delineate the aquaculture area for Catherine Puckett. And Catherine Puckett is one of 4 aquaculturists on the harbor, and she's really quite an amazing woman. She, I believe her company name is Oyster Wench, and she's farms oysters, clams, and 2 years ago she started also farming kelp, sugar kelp, which is a seaweed, and that's a perfect growing season in the harbor because it likes cold water. So you grow it, you put the lines of kelp in November, and you harvest everything in April and May, and then all your gear is out of the harbor, and you can set to work doing oysters and she, as I say, quahogs, and she hopes to start farming mussels one day soon. And she's got a little helper there. That's her daughter, Luna. This is some of the gear that she has in the water now for growing oysters. This apparatus has these each are bags of oysters, and they slide in like little vertical bags. I'll show you one, a better picture. Here's one, she's just pulled it out and she's checking it. You grow the oysters in these bags, and you have to sort and take them out by size as you go along. So this is her getting ready to sort the oysters that she's getting ready for market. And here's one of those bags. She's pulled it on board, and it's got the oysters that are growing, and she will then dump these bags out with the able-bodied assistant of Luna, and then she will sort through them for size, and if the ones that are not quite ready for market, then she will put back in the bag and put back in that water in the apparatus to continue growing. And she's selling her oysters in a few places, not too many, because she's only in her, I think, 3rd year. So her stock isn't as high as she would like, but you can get these. And she's named her variety the Block Island Pearls at Deadeye Dick's. And I hope to get there one day this summer and try some of them out. And just to be in on the secret, Pearl is her older daughter, so I can't wait to see what's going to come for the Luna, either mussels or oysters or whatever. But great industry, and aquaculture is very important. It's a great, not only is it a great economic resource for somebody living year-round on Block Island. Making oysters are incredibly efficient at filtering water. And getting filtering the water, the ocean water that they're in. Each oyster can filter 50 gallons a day. So there's a lot of oysters out there being farmed, and that means a lot of water is being filtered and cleaned throughout the summer by the 4 different aquaculturists. And I think I'll have a chance to mention them all as we go through the presentation. But this is Catherine Puckett and her helper. Now, as we go along this edge, we're on the sort of what would be the southeastern edge of Indian Head Neck going east. The buoys I pointed out a minute ago would be over here. And I will say this is one of the hardest parts to walk in the Great Salt Pond. First of all, it's very peaty and hummocky, but it gets undercut, and tide can work away under it. So if there's fresh water running off, it can have these little gullies that you don't necessarily see with all this grass on it. So your footing, I take a stick with me to help me with the balance and help me get up when I fall into the mud. So it's very hummocky and sort of deceiving to walk along this edge. But the mud is very, very sticky, and you sink pretty quickly. So you don't sink too far, but you do go in, and it's hard walking. In addition to that, there's lots of junk along this edge, and it's junk that's been there for a long time, from the Trims Pond and Harbor and Hog Pen being such a working waterfront for over a century. And there's old boards and hunks of metal and parts of piers, and so you really have to watch your footing. So nowadays, when I lead the walk of multiple people on this, I often try to get somebody in a skiff or dinghy to kind of take us over water, because the walking can be difficult. And when I'll show you in a second. But when I was walking along this edge, which was actually, this was a couple of weeks, maybe a week ago, maybe a little more, I found this growing among the pickleweed, the saltwort here, glasswort, I mean. This is sea lavender, and this doesn't usually start blooming until mid-August. It does seem that all around the island, and I guess the marine environment is no different, the flowering plants are very early this year. And I'm sure in later presentations, I'll have much better pictures of sea lavender, but this being the first that I've seen just starting to bloom was remarkable. Now, what I've done is come around again. Here's the Hog Pen. We've come around this point. We've started our mucky walk along here. This is Catherine's oyster farm, parts of it, the marked parts. There's the oyster dredge, the clam dredge. And this is just to sort of give you a panoramic view of, really how big this area is and how it spreads out like tentacles in all different directions. And as we continue on, this is some of that old wood. This is old giant timber that's been on this beach. Every time I've walked this beach over 10 years, this timber is there. And breaking down a little bit more all the time. But these are the things you need to look for. These old spikes, not all of which have a nice little rusted nut on them to protect you a little bit. Some of them are quite sharp and hooked. So you really got to watch what you're doing out there. And then as we go back into this back corner, and the town beach is over here, you can just get a little bit of it again, just to get your bearings. It kind of opens up and towards Corn Neck Road. And this is the oyster farm setup of Chris Warfell. And he has quite a large setup. They have different ways of growing, different things. These are suspended in the water column. The racks that I showed you of Catherine's are those are actually grow out bags, so they're no longer they're more accessible this time of year. But you have to work, when you're working oysters as an aquaculturist now, you have two areas. You have a place outside in the harbor near the entrance where you keep your market oysters, the oysters that you're not going to be selling this summer are still in your inner pond here in Trim's Pond. But you can, because this area is closed to shellfishing, it also means you cannot take the oysters out of this area for market. So all of the oysters that you're getting on Black Island oysters have been taken out of the Trim's Pond area before Memorial Day and put out in holding areas out right near the Coast Guard station where they have clean, fresh, cold water all the time. So there's no chance of the warming waters of the inner ponds contaminating the oysters for harvest. But you still have to work these areas and keep your bags clean and separate the oysters as they get bigger, because they can get so big in one of those bags that they start to stifle and deform themselves. So Catherine, as well as Chris and Chris Littlefield and Perry, they all need to not only work the oysters in the outer ponds for market, they have to work these inner ponds for the future all summer long. And actually on this little work boat, there's two people working, sorting bags, and he has to go and take each of those bags and sort it and clean it and make sure they're not fouled with, seaweed and everything else. So, but this is Chris Warfell's oyster aquaculture bed in this part of Trim's Pond. And so we've gone a little bit further. Here's his stuff right here. And I've made my way through this very muddy, uneven, treacherous ground up onto the road that goes to the Sullivan house. But I've stopped to take this picture. Again, the Trim's Pond is continuing on this way towards Beach Avenue. And you get this wonderful view up on Indian Head Neck of the other side of those beautiful buildings, the George Willis House, which is this mansard house. And these names that I'm using are from the historic preservation book about the historic buildings on Black Island. These are the names given at the time that the buildings were built. I grew up knowing this building as the McGregor House. It is currently owned by the O'Brien family, but when it was built in 1887, it was the George Willis House. And again, this is known as the Sullivan House today, but it was built as a Ninnicroft Lodge. So, but beautiful views of it from the backside. Again, great old buildings. And another view of that same thing up on the hillside. There were great clouds that particular day, and the water was very clear. Now, as I say, I'm up on the road, the road that goes to the Sullivan house, just to kind of get this particular day. I was ending my walk here, but this area around the corner until you get to the part right across from the town beach is very tricky because it's very hummocky, lots of little like waterways and lots of mud. So you got to take your time. But what's interesting about it is, as you look down this road, on the one side, on the left, you have this beautiful little pond, and it has a culvert underneath the road, and it flows out into Trim's Pond this way. And this is clearly fresh water. It's got freshwater vegetation in it. Oh, here's another panoramic view of that, getting the whole thing together. It's a little distorted, but you get the idea. And this is proof that I was there. But in that pond, along the edge of that pond, near the road is a lot of this. This is swamp milkweed. It's blooming. It also seems early to me. It's in the milkweed family, like common milkweed or butterfly weed. It has very distinctive milkweed-like flowers, and it's a beautiful pink, rose pink color. So that is blooming all around the island now. I think it must tolerate some salt water because occasionally this area is flooded, although not generally in the summertime. But this is clearly a freshwater plant, and it's growing right on the edge of that little pond near the road. Now, as we go along, if we went back on the beach at this point, went onto the beach that would be Trim's Pond behind, across the street from the town beach pavilion, it's very muddy. And this is a really interesting shell that Corey Hines found a couple of weeks ago, beginning of June. And this is the shell. All it was the upper carapace of a diamondback terrapin. Now, I don't know, I believe one person may have found one of these living on Block Island, but this is not a turtle terrapin. It's not a species that is considered to be here, to be a Block Island resident. This is a pretty rare terrapin turtle. It is found throughout Rhode Island, or in parts of coastal Rhode Island. It is a native species. I would love to be the one who discovers that they're nesting here, but that hasn't happened yet. But there's enough evidence every once in a while to indicate that it might be here, even if very sparsely. And that's because shells are found. It says a brackish water species. So it's not unusual. All the evidence that anybody's ever found has been in salt water, and it has been near the Beach Avenue Bridge. It's been across from Baby Beach, which is again in the harbor pond. Chris Littlefield once found it in a lobster pot that he had out by Bean Point. Every once in a while it shows up. And its natural nesting area is known in Watch Hill. It's parts of along Narragansett Bay where the intertidal area meets is. So it's both intertidal and estuary. So where there's a estuary for saltwater inundation, but freshwater leaching into it. So it can handle both. And so if you ever see a shell like this, take a picture, record it, call me, and we'll see if we can't eventually find out if this animal is living and or breeding on Block Island. This one obviously is neither, but it's a very distinctive shell, so keep your eye out. You could be part of history. You'd be a community scientist by making an observation on behalf of the greater good. So this is back. Okay, so we're back looking at Trim's Pond, but we're up on the Beach Avenue Bridge, what I call the Beach Avenue Bridge. It's low tide. This is the area back here where it's can get very low, can be exposed beach. There's a lot of fiddler crabs back there. And that's the area where Corey found that shell. This is at low tide, as I said. This is a great place to see the differences between the tides. Here it is. Here's that same rock here at high tide. And so the water is all the way up. Well, you can see where it's going to be, you know, almost up to the bank of this overhanging. These bushes are these bushes, not bushes, grasses hanging over. So, and then looking just to the left, you'd have, if you were on the bridge, you're looking to the left at this house belongs to Lynn Paquin. You're looking at Indian Head Neck with the Sullivan House, and then the Cozy Cottage right here. And this is a really great place to walk. It's not too muddy. It's just in that back corner near the Sullivan House, right below the Indian Head Neck, that is really, really, really muddy. So, but we've come up on the road to cross over, and this is the bridge. This is all these state bridges are numbered. This is bridge number 140. But I often refer to it as the Beach Avenue Bridge, and many of us refer to it as the Dunn's Bridge, because the Dunn family had the house there where Lynn Paquin, the house I just pointed out, used to be a Dunn, owned by the Dunns. So I kind of grew up knowing it as the Dunn's Bridge, and then to sort of accommodate people who didn't know that, I call it the Beach Avenue Bridge. And if I was talking to the state, I'd be talking about Bridge 140. So we're on the other side of the bridge from where I just was, looking into Harbor Pond. And this is where you see the no jumping or diving from this bridge sign. But as we came over the bridge, over the road, came up one side and down the other. And right now you see lots of this growing if you happen to drive by and notice or walk by. This is called bouncing bet. It's a beautiful little summer plant. It's also known as soapwort. It is known to lather up if you were to take its leaves and with some water and sort of scrub it together with your hands, it would lather up, and thus the name of soapwort, or bouncing bet is kind of an old term for a washerwoman, somebody who did laundry, because they were bouncing up and down, scrubbing on the washboard. And here it is a little bit closer. It's beautiful. It's in a family of flowers known as the pinks. And also in the area was a great egret. It was out on the flat land in the middle of Harbor Pond. So here we are looking at Harbor Pond. And we're looking southerly. Here's the telephone company tower. Sort of get your bearings. We're on the bridge, and this is where it gets real at low tide. This is exposed. This is where that great egret was. Sometimes this is really massively exposed. And we're right now in a time period of extreme tide. So anytime between now and the next few days, I think the full moon might be tomorrow or soon. So we have extreme activity on the tides. And this is a little bridge, dock that I keep an eye on, because it's a fixed dock, not a floating dock. So I always like to take note of how high or how low the tides are relative to this dock, which is owned by the Gassners. I think it's still the Gassners. So just sort of scanning around, first southerly, now more westerly, looking back into Harbor Pond. This is the tower at the power company. So it's this wide sort of view. And right around this corner, I couldn't find a good way to get to it without trespassing. I don't like to trespass too much in the summer. But that's where Chris Littlefield has his aquaculture lease and is also growing oysters. And then if you just keep going a little bit further, we're coming across. This is coming back towards us at the bridge, and then at the bridge number 140. So that's our sort of overview from this spot, looking into Harbor Pond. I have walked around this area, and generally the rule of thumb is that the substrate, the beach, is not hard to, it's nice and easy to walk on at low tide, except in the areas where there's fresh water flowing in. And that's because the silt that's being carried with that fresh water hasn't had time to compact. And so it's always very muddy, deceivingly muddy. So wherever you have fresh water coming in is where you're going to have the muddiest sort of edge, and you have to be you know, mindful when you're walking around. So I did not do that. This is a much easier walk to do in the wintertime when the low tides are really low. I don't know if you can hear that, but it must be an east wind because there goes the plane overhead. All right, in that area, just shoot back here for a second. This beautiful, this is all fresh, different Spartina grasses. And this area, this is low tide, but at high tide, this edge is flooded. And that's where we see these quote unquote mallards. And I was having a great time watching them. They were really swimming around, eating at the vegetation, seeds and other things. They were not diving, they were not sticking their head way down to get the vegetation. They were feeding at the surface among the vegetation. These are, I'm pretty sure that these are a hybrid between a mallard and a black duck. Black duck tend to have this sort of black hood cap, but there were several of them. They all looked a little different. I only got this one in two different poses, but some of them look like, well, maybe it's not a black duck, maybe it's a shoveler. I don't know, but clearly a mallard hybrid, not full-on mallard. Again, I mentioned that the Gasner's Bridge, and here it is at low tide, and see how much land between, or space between the water and underneath of the dock. And here it is at high tide. I have taken pictures. I've been taking pictures of this dock at high tide every month for a year and a half now. And sometimes high tide isn't this high, and sometimes the high tide is covering the end of the dock. And one of the reasons I'm taking this photo every month is to document change over time. I hope to last a few years. And see if we can actually document the average rising of sea level. Of course, at moon tides, it's higher, and depending on the weather, sometimes we can have higher tides. So like everything, when you're trying to document sea level rise and climate change, you need to have information over a long time and see a trend, not individual differences month to month. But I've amassing quite a number, well, not that many, 20 or so pictures of this dock at high tide, as I say, for the last year and a half. So hopefully I have a few more. And here's just a super close up of the dock just to see. As I say, I do have photos where the tide was over the top of the dock, but this is more or less, this was taken, this particular high tide picture was taken, oh, I took this one last night actually. So, and my day to document this month, the high tide, is tomorrow. So this is I attempt to do it at the highest tide, the highest predicted tide of the month. And the highest predicted tide is not always the highest. So now we've made our way into the back, or the southern part of Harbor Pond. So again, just to help you get your bearings, we've changed our position. We're at the Solviken property looking at Harbor Pond. Here is the telephone tower. Here is the power company tower. And the Beach Avenue Bridge is over in this direction. And we see another set of aquaculture set up. And here it is a little closer. This is also Chris Warfell's. I believe he's growing quahogs as well as oysters in this area. And just to get a close up of what's floating out there are two things. Lots of racks for holding baby shellfish, and double-crested cormorant sitting out here stretching, and there are several of them. So another species to add to our checklist as we go along. And we're looking at, this is of course foreshortened, but we're looking at the back of Ocean Avenue. So these would be the harbor, oh, I just lost the name of those 4 duplexes that are built in here, but you get access to them from Ocean Avenue.
It's the Martin property.
Thank you very much, the Martin houses. So that's what we're looking at the back. And you can see those are beautiful properties because where they look out is terrific. But I wanted to point out two things when you foreshorten. First, this is to the left of the Martin property. And you see this right here. This is a channel. This is where fresh water is flowing into Harbor Pond here every day, every hour of the day. At high tide, you can actually see water if you're walking along the sidewalk between the grocery store. The grocery store is the next building down on the left. This is the Old Island Pub. If you're walking down, you come out of the grocery store, you're walking on the sidewalk, there's a little guardrail, you look over and you can see the culvert right here, and it's flowing. And sometimes when the tide is low, there's only a little trickle of fresh water coming out. And sometimes when the tide is high, as it was on this particular photo, I wish I had one of these from the winter time. It'd be a lot easier to show because you wouldn't have any of that darn vegetation in the way. But it's really, I always look in here. If I'm walking on the sidewalk, I'm looking in here to see. I've seen great blue herons. I've seen night crown herons. Black crown night herons. But these waterways, and I don't have any photos of this yet, but these little freshwater waterways that connect the ocean to the upland ponds are the avenue by which American eel travel to the ponds around Block Island. And sometimes Deandra Verbest, again, the great salt pond scientist, has had a eel ladder here and trapped to see how many eels are getting into the freshwater upland. This little culvert comes all the way down from the pond next to Town Hall, which is Milltail, and behind that, Milltail Swamp Pond. So freshwater travels a long distance, as I say, every day of the year. It comes down, crosses under the road, and then empties into the back of Harbor Pond right here. Now, the other place along Ocean Avenue that Harbor Pond almost touches the street is right here. This kind of goes around a little corner. And again, because these are areas of freshwater inflow, they are very muddy. They're very difficult to traverse. Not impossible, but always good to have a stick with you to test your step or help you get out. But this comes right up across from the hardware store, which I believe is right here. Again, angle's a little weird, but if you go right past the hardware store, actually right across the street from the hardware store, there's a little parcel of land there. It's got an old building on it. And if you're walking along there, again, walking along is a great way to see things. You'll see there's sort of like a little tiny labyrinth of paths that the person who owns that property cuts. And you could get from that out onto the Harbor Pond there. This is Phragmites. This indicates a marshy area with fresh water, but salt water does come up. But again, at a super high tide, you can be walking on the sidewalk and see the marine environment right at the sidewalk level. And as we look at sea level rise, we are going to be seeing more and more times where flooding of Ocean Avenue happens in this area. Because the elevation is so low, which I won't go too much into this, but since we have electricity and water and sewer underneath that road, sea level rise is going to be a greater and greater challenge along Ocean Avenue. More critical, I would say, than worrying about whether or not Corn Neck Road is getting breached on occasion. But I digress as usual, but those are the areas where you might not think about it, but Harbor Pond is right at your fingertips on both sides, through the Solviken or along the sidewalk on Ocean Avenue. And if you keep going down Ocean Avenue, across from the power company, you'll see the Phragmites, and you'll see again, this is Harbor Pond. We've come past the Block Island, going towards the new harbor. We've come past the Block Island Depot, and we're looking over again in wintertime. There's much more unobstructed view into Harbor Pond. And then this headland back here, this is Negus Park. And if you go right past this, you go into Negus Park and go into the corner, the back corner, what would be the southeast corner of Negus Park, is mowed right here. Here's the path that goes behind the original, would have been the road behind the original Hygeia house, and then comes out up on Beach Avenue, kind of across from the current Hygeia house, which, as I say, was the annex. But that's a beautiful little path to go. I love these paths that are around the inner ponds, especially for wintertime walks. They're often protected because of vegetation or landscape, and they give you terrific access of water, which, if you're a bird watcher in the winter, that's what you're looking for. And if it's marine water, salt water, it's less likely to be frozen, so more likely to have a congregation of sea ducks and other birds to see. And it's a beautiful little walk. You can do a nice little loop by going through Negus Park and along this pathway, coming out by Beach Avenue and coming back. So, and as you come out, you can, right where the little path comes out before you head up to Beach Avenue, this is the view you get of Harbor Pond. Again, now we're looking down towards the beachhead and over here towards Gassner property. And again, this little spit is a little sort of peninsula of land. It has a beautiful little house on it, recently changed hands. And around the corner here is where Chris Littlefield has his inner pond aquaculture lease. But as I said, without trespassing, I couldn't really get a good photo of that for this particular walk. But lots of things are hanging out. This little family of Canada geese, they did stroll away from me, but they certainly didn't rush off as if they had any fear. But this is a family of adults and this year's young swimming away. And again, just to look a little bit more in the other direction, a little bit more southerly, I've always enjoyed looking at this back view of town. You can see many buildings that you recognize, the Gothic, the National, the Surf. But because of you're in a different location, the perspective is quite different. Here's the point of the Harbor Baptist Church. And I think, to my eye, one of my favorite buildings on the whole island is this little boathouse. And it's had some work done on it recently. It was reshingled. It's upkept well by the people who own the property. And I guess if I had a choice of an office or a studio, that sure would be it. I can't imagine a better place to be perched while you're trying to do something creative. Now, we've gone back up onto Beach Avenue and sort of right across from, almost, not quite, but almost across from where we come out on Beach Avenue from the Negus Park, looking at Harbor Pond, there's a trail for the Beach Avenue Trail. And here's recognized by all of these signs, and walkers are welcome. And little did you know that you could get up there and have one of the most beautiful views of Trim's Pond, again, looking at the Beach Avenue Bridge from a different angle. Again, this classic old house, Paquin's house now. It used to be the Dunn house, thus the Dunn's Bridge, cozy cottage over here. And again, because this little cove is often not seen from other places, you can often see egrets and great blue herons. I saw a great blue heron there the other evening. So wonderful access. And in this grassland field, some flowering plants right now. We have Canada Thistle, which is pretty rampant through this field, and wherever Canada Thistle spreads quite easily. It's got a very big root system, and it's pretty spiky. You don't really want to deal with it too much, but it's pretty, and of course the bees like it and other pollinators. And then this is cow vetch. It's in the pea family, which you can definitely sort of get the sense of. It hasn't really produced any pea pods just yet, but soon it will be. But very distinct of the very fine leaves on here. And sometimes pea leaves are much broader. These are pretty narrow, and they have this very distinctive arc to their flower stem, raceme. They call this a raceme, where all the flowers are coming off of one side. It's not both sides. So cow vetch. And if you go to the end of this path, this trail from the Beach Avenue, you come on to the other part of back onto Trim's Pond from the beach. This is the view from the Beach Avenue Trail. And this is the other place I've been taking. When I take my high tide photo at Gassner's dock, I also come to this spot and take my high tide photo. And at high tide, this is low tide, but at high tide, the water is up to, and in the winter sometimes lapping well into this stone wall. And I have photos of that from winter, sometimes covered with ice, but a little foggy on this particular day. But again, Indian Head Neck, the Sullivan House, this is where Chris Warfell's first oyster farm is, and another view of Trim's Pond. Now we've kind of hop, skipped, and jumped our way down Beach Avenue and gotten ourselves onto Ocean Avenue and going down towards the Beach Avenue Bridge. We did pass, without taking proper note, Twin Maples, which is a historic business along Beach Avenue. Of course, it backs right up to this part of Trim's Pond. I have walked that edge, as have a few. I do not recommend walking from Twin Maples to the Beach Avenue Bridge. Not only is it extremely muddy and slippery, if you get high enough on the land to not be slipping and falling into the mud, then you're walking in about calf deep poison ivy. So it's just not to be done. Much better to go along the street and come down and rejoin here at the Trim's Pond Bridge. And at this point, we're looking at the eastern lobe of Fort Island. And here we see the rest of it. And then, so this is the eastern lobe of Fort Island, and right across from that is Twin Maples, and they have a dock here. And I think many of you know this is where you can get bait, fish tackle and bait. And I think they used to rent little dinghies. I'm not sure if they still do, but people definitely are keeping their boats there with of course permission. And the best thing about going to Twin Maples is John Swinton. If you want to know anything about fishing and what's running and what's not and how to catch it, and by the way, where do you get a squid jig and what is a squid jig? All of that information can be gleaned from John Swinton, who's hanging out here in the, oh, not here, actually up the hill a little bit, but hanging out and giving you all kinds of fishing advice. So great place to be. And of course, here, there are many maples on this property. And although this one doesn't have a twin, it does have another one nearby. So Twin Maples. Icon for this part of Trim's Pond. And of course, there's all kinds of activity coming in and out. The kayakers coming and going in the west and coming and going in the west end of Trim's Pond. So they are coming, and now they're going. So they've come. I took this picture from the bridge. First of them coming towards the bridge to going west, and here they are having passed under the bridge into the very, very far reaches of Trim's western lobe of Trim's Pond. And this area right here is where the ponds behind Redgate Farm. There was a pond and now it's a marsh, and there's another small pond, a little freshwater wetlands sort of drain into this part. Now I mentioned that my Redgate Farm, so my family and my grandmother, we back at the time that I lived there, what was the big old white farmhouse known as the White House, small W. we would love to come down to the edge of Trim's Pond and play, my brother and I, but we were under strict instructions, never, never, never go onto the edge, onto the shoreline, because there was quicksand. And my whole, almost, it's embarrassing how long I thought there was quicksand back here. Now I know that was my grandmother trying to protect us from the mud. And it wasn't really quicksand, but I know from experience that mud in some areas are sucking, shoe sucking mud. So that's one of the reasons I've never actually walked this back part from this point all the way around to this point of Trim's Pond. It's not that easy to get to, and I live in mortal fear of the quicksand. Also back out looking just from the bridge, more evidence of the working waterfront. We have Perry Phillips aquaculture workboat here, and he's actually out at the time that this photo is taken, because he has another skiff that's usually tied up to this. And you can tell that he's out because the skiff is gone and the kayak of which he uses to get to the boat is tied up. So you either see the workboat and the kayak, or I guess maybe I think it's a kayak, or you see the workboat and the skiff that's tied up to it. And this is how he's storing a lot of his trap gear, his mesh bags and the apparatuses for holding the bags. So I often wonder what will happen there, but that's Perry Phillips aquaculture boat base. And then the Committee for the Great Salt Pond, which I'll be talking about a little bit more in a future segment. But the Committee for the Great Salt Pond does a lot of, has done over a 10-year period, more than 10 years, collected water quality samples. And they have a workboat, and this is their research vessel, the RV research vessel, Committee for the Great Salt Pond. And that is moored out. You can see that when you cross over the bridge. We're still on the Beach Avenue Bridge, only we're on, instead of the east side where I just was taking those photos, we're on the west side looking into the back part of Trim's Pond where the quicksand is, and we're looking at the western lobe of Fort Island. So if you think back all the way back to where I showed you the old historic map, where it showed that Fort Island was an entire island. It was before this road was built. Now the road has been built, the bridge has been put in, and it bisects Fort Island. And this is, but a little bit further down the road on the west side of the road street is the Historical Society marker about Fort Island. And it's interesting to read, and there's some history about how it came to be named that. In our growing awareness of indigenous habitations on Block Island and how things were, it may be time to update the historic marker. It's still Fort Island, but perhaps a little more research should be done as to what happened here. I don't know. But Block Island is known for a lot of its archaeological sites, and Fort Island has yielded a lot of shell middens and evidence of Native American campsites. So that will be in a coming segment as well, discussion about the Native American shell heaps, shell middens. And now I've gone across the street and gone up the road behind the Fishworks building up to the eastern lobe of Fort Island. So I've got some elevation here, and I'm looking northward towards the end of Indian Head Neck and this little Rat Island and this little marina, which is owned by the Payne family. Sorry about the phone ringing and the airplane going overhead. Here's another a little bit closer view of Rat Island. This is at low tide. I just checked that out a little bit ago. Sometimes what's visible of Rat Island is just this little hummock of grass. So it's always fun to keep an eye on Rat Island and see how big or small it is at any particular time. And again, still up on Fort Island on the little hummock, the little drumlin of land, we're looking easterly again, the town beach, Trim's Pond. Back here is where Chris Warfell's oyster farm is, and Catherine's is a little bit further out here. It's not the clearest photos. And we're winding down here. We're looking again over all the activity. Definitely working waterfront for work boats. Here's a crane and the mooring boat, the Laura, the lobster boat. And again, this is the area that's technically what I grew up knowing as the Hog Pen. And to me, the Hog Pen is just this little segment of Trim's Pond. But I'd love to hear what other people's historical references are for the Hog Pen. Not only why it may have been named that, but how long it's been known as the Hog Pen, and what is the delineation. I just always think of this cove, but perhaps others think of it as more. And another view at the Hog Pen, several marinas. This was very grown up in the last, very much developed in the last, 50 years. This area, just this area right here where there's a little dock, and I noticed maybe even more docks going in now, used to be only outhauls. And in our last segment, I showed you what an outhaul looks like, an outhaul mooring. And all of these, it wouldn't have been boat slips. It would have just been outhauls for small boats that could be moored with a tethered outhaul. But now there's a floating dock there. In the old days, the very old days, this little dock is where the oil tank storage is. The mobile islander was a small oil tanker, tiny, that would come in here and offload oil through the pipes here. Of course, that hasn't happened in many, many, many years. Now all our fuel oil is brought to the island on tankers on the boat, but this is where the mobile islander used to come and deliver oil. So that's a working dock that's not really used for boats. It's used for, it's really just there. It's not used at all, really. And then this is Ken Lacoste Harbor Road Yacht Basin or something like that. And then Smugglers or the Maritime Institute now. And here's a different view of that. Again, you can still see the piping from where the mobile islander came into this berth. And then, let's see, let me get and then this is Ken Lacoste little area right here. And then these boats are the Hog Pen Marina, which is a Cliff Pane. And these docks are used to be Smuggler's Cove. Now it's Black Island Maritime Institute. So we get a lot of working boats, a lot of recreational boats, a lot of activity going on in the Hog Pen. And again, looking from the other side now, I've come to the other side. I'm standing on the Black Island Marine Smuggler's Dock, looking at Ken's. And between the previous photo and this photo yesterday, this crane has moved in, and they're doing some kind of work over here on the pane on the what I would call the Fort Island dock. So I didn't get too close. I don't know if they're repairing or building. And this is the little corner of the Hog Pen, Ocean Avenue right here, the Black Island Maritime Institute sign. And this is another area I keep an eye on for high tides and extreme weather, because I have seen the water high tide over this and flowing over the road. And this particular picture is taken during a high tide, but extreme high tides is really flooding into the parking lot of the Black Island Maritime Institute nowadays, and will happen more and more frequently, I'm sure. So again, there's nothing, absolutely nothing, half so much worth doing as simply messing about in boats. And here's a crane boat. This is also for moorings and boat work, owned by Ken Lacoste. This is a great charter head boat, fishing boat, the Harley. I hope to someday go out for a day of fishing on the Harley with Hank. And sitting at Ken Lacoste's little Harbor Road yacht basin, it's the sweetest little day sloop you can imagine, and great little name, Angel. And I don't know whose it is, but it is a beautiful boat to my eye anyway. And our checklist is growing. I grew by a lot of plants this time, not so many other animals, but we have a lot of industry going on in this part of the Great Salt Pond. So a lot more focus on the built environment and the working environment. But we will be back to the more natural history environment soon. And after our next one, and we're going to be taking a little hiatus. Our next Great Salt Pond Stroll Zoom will be August 12th, and we'll be going from the boat ramp next to the Black Island Maritime Institute to Champlin's. So it'll be marina, open space, marina, open space, marina, open space. And then before we get for the later series back into the outer reaches of the Great Salt Pond. And I've been ending with just little bits of video. This was and that where those mallards, quote unquote, mallards were. You can see there's quite a diversity in plumages here. I really am not sure who was mating with whom, but these birds were having a great time eating. And I think it was a good lesson for me because I was on the road and the traffic was whizzing by, which you can hear. But in all the hubbub above me, below me was a perfectly happy, contented, peaceful little scene of feeding ducks, mallards, or their kin. Oops. And with that, I will escape and stop sharing my screen and take any questions. How are we doing?
Sorry there, people can unmute themselves if they want. Oh, that was great, Kim. So Trim's Pond was separated off from the Great Salt Pond at one point. Where that, I guess I had never really thought about that. So where that causeway was.
Right, that was actually I think there was actually a tiny little causeway and bridge there, a little, stick kind of bridge. So it was always flowing back into there, wasn't it?
It did flow, okay.
It did flow, yeah.
Okay, all righty.
Yeah. Wow, I'm sorry it's so late. I guess I'm taking too long for these half-hour presentations.
No, they're great. Hold on, we got a couple little notes here. Oh, it says you're not allowing us to unmute. Oh, I'm sorry. Can you unmute now, Suzanne? Okay, I'm sorry about that. Asked to unmute. I'm just doing it for everybody individually, just in case I messed that up. Sorry about that.
Josie's muted. Diandra, Bob G, they're muted.
Yeah.
Everybody's muted unless they Josie can talk.
Okay, all righty. So yeah, so Josie loved learning about the island aquaculturists, and Dee, yeah, you're still muted. Sorry, Dee. There you go. Sorry, we still have problems with the smooth technology on these. But anyway, Bob G was having some difficulty, but he'll looks forward to the next one as well. So no problem there. Yeah, no, that was great. And, I've sort of noticed, we'll be real quick, but I have noticed, my morning walks kind of around the Payne Jonas place. There's, Carol feeds ducks there. There's some odd looking ducks, and I'm not sure, I'm not very good at my bird identification, but I was wanting to take a picture of one in particular and send it to you because I can't figure it out. It doesn't match up on your...
I suspect it's a hybrid.
Okay.
Most of the ducks around now are black ducks and mallards. And those ducks I was looking at, maybe Suzanne will agree or not, did not look exactly like either one of them.
Might have been a little touch of widgeon. I'm not sure.
Mhm.
You know,
I
one
wonder,
thing I've enjoyed so much, probably because of my very elderly dogs, but the Beach Avenue path has been a glorious thing. Pretty, what you're calling cow veg, I mean, solid cow veg, so that you're in a sea of purple. And
Yeah.
earlier, there were the yellow dandelion-like things, and the cow vetch, and the beach roses. So it was a sea of purple, pink, and yellow. And I would go there every day. It's a marvelous, marvelous place, and brief, and even a loop. I mean, who doesn't love a loop?
I totally agree, Suzanne. Actually, I just walked it last night with my dog, and the cow veg, it is gorgeous. I mean, I just wrote it down too, because Jeffrey was like, "What is that?" And I was like, "I don't know," but it's a nice little easy loop, beautiful. It's great.
I will say, I think from doing this section and trying to figure out how to do it without doing all of the linear footage, I realized we have a lot of access to the inner harbor between the Negus Park and the Beach Avenue Park trail and the Solviken,
Mhm.
and just our roads, as the Ocean Avenue. That it's pretty great. And even, you know, at the bridges, at both bridges, you can get down to the water there. And yeah, I think we're pretty lucky the amount of access we have to the Great Salt Pond in general, but I don't think I fully appreciated until slowing down to walk how much we have just in this area. And if I were to do the linear feet of those inner harbors, it would be almost as much as the Great Salt Pond itself.
Yeah.
So,
No, you're right. There is so much visual access as well as, physical
Mhm.
access to it. So no, it's great. Thank you so much. So, as Kim mentioned, we're having a little hiatus. We're going to take scheduling issues. We're taking the next two, we're not doing the Zoom, right? The next 2 Thursdays. And we're going to resume on, what day was it? Did you say?
The 12th.
The 12th of August. So I'll send out a BI bulletin and another email for that. So until then, thanks, Kim.
Yeah. See you all. Thank you
Okay.
for your loyalty.
Great. I wouldn't miss it.
Yeah.
Okay. Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye.